you a great deal of data that has been collected over the last several weeks, month and a half or so, whenever we started talking about this. So we're going to do a quick overview of the survey and the focus group results, and then talk a little bit about sort of the input. And Rodney and I are going to do kind of a tag team as we go through this process. So I'm going to kind of talk about the data, and then he's going to provide color commentary from all of the qualitative input that we got through this process. And beginning with the end in mind, if you haven't looked at all of the information yet, what you're going to see is there's actually a pretty strong consensus across most of the groups and all of the people that we talked to. And there was hundreds. So it's sort of interesting how this process has emerged and how it's sort of connected into, again, a pretty strong consensus. We're going to first start talking about the district-wide survey. And we actually had a total of 455 responses, which was an excellent response rate. Anytime we get more than 400 surveys out of any community, we're happy, because statistical representativeness of a sample is always really important. And anytime you get over 400, you have a better chance of getting a sample that's statistically representative of the population. So we were really happy about that. The other thing that's important for you to know as board members is that we made the executive decision to include all of the survey data into the analysis, because even though a bunch of people didn't actually sign their names the way we wanted them to, there was no significant difference. There was no statistical difference between those who signed their name and those who didn't sign their name. So we included all of the data together. Okay, so in other words, the data was identical either way. So all of the people were included in the summary. We had 305 parents, a combination of elementary, K to 3, 4 to 5, junior high and high school. Again, a nice sampling across those different groups. We had 43 teachers, 23 staff members, and 167 residents and community members that didn't have kids in the school. So that's kind of a nice representation.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Out of the parents surveyed, what was your maximum possible, so 305 out of how many potential surveys?
Well, 455.
You mean the total number of surveys
That could have came back, not that they'd come back.
Well, we didn't do mailed surveys. This was all done online. So
I guess how many potential parents would there be in the district? Maybe Mike knows that.
5,600.
We have almost 3,000 students in the family. The survey was emailed to all our family members and made available on the website, as well as people can call in and pick up a hard copy or have it sent to them, as well as visit central locations throughout the community. I think what Debbie, I don't want to speak for Debbie, I think what Debbie's saying is the responses that you see in front of you are reflective of those who completed online. No hard copies were returned to the district. So out of 3,000 students, so we'll say that's how many family members we have. You have what, a third or less than a third of that, but yeah, about 10%.
10%. But I mean, if you look at the size of the sample related to statistical representativeness, and if you're interested, I can send you a sampling table. If you look at the size of the sample, and I talked about the sample of 400, a sample of 400, it is statistically representative of any size population that's over 400, actually. Okay, so if you have 1 million people, believe it or not, statistically, you can have 1 million people in a population, and you survey 400 of them, and they're randomly selected. It's going to be plus or minus 5% confidence interval around the data. Okay, so what that means is if 40% of the people in the sample said that they agree with something, the real number, we could survey any other 400 people, and we're going to get the same data plus or minus 5% around that 40%. So the real answer is somewhere between 35 and 45%. And you're going to get that same sampling and those same results 95% of the time. If you kept surveying and surveying over and over again, 95% of the time, you're going to get that same answer. Okay? So that's actually how
I understand that.
statistics work. And with a sample of 305 parents, the error rate goes from 5% up to about 6.5%. So if 40% of them, if 40% of the parents say we believe this, the real answer is going to be plus or minus 6.5% either way. So it doesn't change the statistical representativeness of it.
Yeah.
Okay? That's a good question, though.
It is a good question. And not to get into the weeds, but correct me if I'm wrong, but for example, we said we have 305 parents. That's households in the sense that it represents, these parents can have multiple children also.
And you could see that by the numbers.
Yes, you can see that. And then same thing, the teachers are it's not a double dip, so to speak. They're a separate representation. If your teacher's a parent, they're not counted in the parent survey.
They were counted as a teacher. They were counted as a teacher. Any other questions methodologically before we move on?
Yeah. So if a teacher is a teacher and a parent and they're counted in the teachers and not the parents or whatever you said, how do you know they're not counted in whatever group?
Well, 'cause
they're
the-
anonymous surveys.
Well, so Jackie, why don't you clarify that for us related to how you actually analyze the data? Did you hear the question?
I did. Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So they're not double counted in your numbers here. So 305 are true parents that might also be a teacher or a staff member. When you look at the subsequent breakout, it's anyone who identified as a parent, you see their scores. Anyone who identified as a teacher, you'll see their scores. So the numbers here are true numbers. So you had 305 parents. Now that doesn't mean that of your 305 parents, 10 of them aren't teachers, 5 aren't staff.
Okay, but out of that 305 parents, how many of those were anonymous parents that you have no idea who they really were?
In that they didn't provide a name.
Right, because that was one of the criteria was that we wanted to see names, but how many anonymous surveys were there that were accepted into these numbers?
So Jackie, how many people didn't put their names?
I need to look at that. I don't have that number off the top of my head, but I know I have it because
Okay. Because again, when we started analyzing the data, I guess what we're saying is these numbers don't change even if we take those people out.
The anonymous people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the percentages.
No, they're not going to change. So if I have a certain opinion and I give you my name, you've got me listed as one person.
Mm-hmm.
But then I go and I fill the survey out with 10 anonymous whatever, and it's all my same opinion. You can take my anonymous ones out and leave my other one in, and we're still the same thing. I'm just saying that.
Right.
And people are smart enough to do that. We have people in the district, people in the community, people in the school district that are smart enough to do that. So that's why, at least from my opinion, why we thought it was important to have names attached so that wasn't going on.
Well, but
And I'm not.
right, and I understand your concern, but what we're telling you is that the data doesn't change either way. Okay? So the percentages that are in here are going to be the same percentages, even if we take all that data out. The anonymous data.
The results are the same.
Correct.
So-
There's no statistical difference
So-
between those who put their name and those who didn't.
So a different way to say that then would be assuming all the anonymous ones were cheating as the potential exists. You had an equal number of cheating saying to do one thing and an equal number of cheating saying to do something different then.
I guess if you want to look at it that way,
Well, you could have.
proportion,
but-
right, but proportionally, it doesn't change the numbers.
But if we're talking about 400 being the magic number for statistics, if 275 of the 400 were anonymous, whatever, it's the anonymity of some of those survey results, it's going to skew this stuff in one way or another. It's going, and maybe it didn't skew it as far as the outcome, but it is, for me at least, casting a shadow on the validity of the 400. Because the 400 is composed of potentially a bunch of, go ahead, I don't understand why, when we said they have to have names, that there are not names, and how many? If there were only 10, that's different. If there were 200 out of 305, that's a problem.
So Jackie will get those numbers, and
Well, so can I just, so
Yeah.
Yeah.
the survey also records IP address. So when we did this, we know that we've got unique IP addresses. Also, I guess factoring in that people could have the same, I guess, if you live in the same household. But to look at the data, there was not redundancy in comments or things. So if people took it more than once, they didn't say the same thing.
Okay. And if they would have done that, they would have had to go to 10 different computers to do,
Yeah, that's right.
okay?
Yeah,
They couldn't do the same thing from the same computer. So we had no redundancy in IP addresses. There was no redundancy in comments.
So Deb, just to clarify for the committee, you're telling us, look, we have really good, reliable data. You accounted for some contingencies as far as fraudulent voting and or duplication of votes. So you believe that the data you have is accurate and reflective and valid for the board to consider. Is that correct?
Correct. And if we took out all of those that were anonymous, the numbers wouldn't change significantly.
Meaning the way that the options that people selected, you
Correct.
see them being consistent?
Yes.
Mike, I'll just add to this, when we started looking at this and they started showing how that was coming in, yes, I offered my opinion. I said, not assuming that there's fraud, I'm assuming that people in the community wanted to have their views represented. I felt that it would be doing a disservice to set aside, even though people didn't follow the directions for putting names down, we know that there are a number of people in our society, for a variety of reasons, that they just feel like they don't want to be identified. That doesn't mean they don't want their opinion to be counted. So we felt that at least we would have all these surveys included, even though they didn't put the name on it, because if they truly represented an individual opinion being offered, we wanted it to be part of it. And then especially when we saw that it statistically was not different, I felt it would be harder justifying why you didn't include them versus why you did include them, as far as gathering as much opinion as possible. That was my logic behind it.
So there were 204 people who didn't provide a name, but some of those did provide an address. So some people gave one, not both.
And the addresses were within the school district.
Correct.
Okay.
Before we move on, just for clarity, for as you go through this, can you define staff, like a
Staff or people who work for the school district who are not teachers.
would that include, so custodials, para-educators, would that include coaches?
It could be their staff technically if they completed. I'm sure they fall under secretaries would probably fall underneath that as well.
But I don't believe, Jackie, that we had specific categories of classes of employees. We just had a category called staff.
Correct.
Staff other than a teacher, okay.
Yeah.
So it was people self-identified. So if they considered themselves to be a staff, they identified themselves as a staff, but there was no clarifying definition as to what was meant by staff.
And that's a good question, Ms. Barker. So that means anyone who identified that way could be in one of those categories that we mentioned. Correct.
Correct. Any other methodological questions? Okay, thank you. So we asked people how well the current configuration is working. So overall, about a little less than half of the population said that it's excellent, very good, or good. About a quarter of the overall results stated fair. 17.8% said poor, and you could see the breakdown here. The community members and staff felt feel that the current configuration, they look at it less favorably than the other groups. Teachers tended to rate the current configuration as fair. 43% of them of the teachers who responded rated it fair. But you could see the breakdown here. And staff, about 35% of the staff, there was mixed feelings from staff. 35% said good, 30% said poor. So differences of opinion. None of the staff members said excellent. So if we looked at the top themes on when people gave a rating of less than good, we asked them to give us an open-ended comment about why they rated that way. The top themes were difficult for parents when kids are in multiple buildings, not an efficient use of resources, should be K-5. There's lots and lots and lots of conversation about where the fifth graders belong. And you're going to see this theme across multiple comments, that the fifth graders are elementary school children. They don't belong in a middle school. We hear that over and over again. And we start to see it here. Too many students transition, and comments about the building. And then we ask people to rate each of the options. So option 1 is the configuration of pre-K to 3 in 2 buildings, 4th and 5th in 1 building, a junior high and a senior high, and closing an elementary building. Here you see the breakdown of the agreement with, whether or not this option would enable a positive learning environment. And what we see here is, a higher, probably about a little more than a quarter of folks disagree that this option would provide a positive learning environment. And, while there are some options to create efficiencies or lower cost, you still have, and you have a smaller percentage of people that disagree with that. So here's the ratings for option 1. Pluses, potentials, and concerns related to option 1. Too many students transitions. People acknowledge that there would be a cost savings, but there were concerns expressed that too many students in one building would create larger class size. And, there's other comments as well.
Let me just add to that in the discussion, just may not be on the chart, but I think from a plus, some of the comments said that the collaboration, from a negative, collaboration would not be as easy to organize. So if you have these buildings the way they're set up, even though you would think, I think that we'll keep coming back to the reason K-5 it's getting mentioned, people see K-5 as being more collaboration because you have more grades in one building. And then, but there also were comments positively that there still would be, even under this option, there would be some improvement in aligning the curriculum and ensuring that the same curriculum is being taught the same way at each grade level in each building.
So it's a little bit better than the current configuration.
Yes.
It's not optimal, and it wasn't actually rated by most as the favorite. The option 2 is the pre-K to 5 in 3 buildings, a junior high, a senior high, and closing the elementary. You see here the agreement. There's a little bit stronger agreement with this one, that this option will help to create efficiencies and lower cost. And you see, more than half of the respondents saying that they agree that this configuration would enable a positive learning environment. If you look at the pluses, potentials, and concerns, on the plus side, it reduces students' transitions. It brings back the idea of community schools, which a lot of people like. It's easier for families and helps keep siblings together, even though some people have a concern with the age gap. So a number of people noted that they felt it was the best option.
And I'll just add to it that some of the big comments in the focus group really talked about there are going to be additional opportunities for teaming, for team teaching, looking at special education. I know Mr. Horchak sitting here for co-teaching is very much a model that's being used to support inclusionary activities. There also would be the ability to look at the pre-K counts grants program now and look for additional opportunities to add another pre-K counts classroom in that setup. And again, going back to this, it just seemed like, in my feeling is that the comments were kind of aimed towards that the more years that you spend in one school, for example, if you spend 3 years versus 4 or 5 years or 6 years in the same school. The more years you're in one school building, the more time you have to create lasting relationships with the staff. And, I use the analogy, there used to be a baseball league, a youth baseball league I was involved in, and they used to have a motto that every time they made decisions, that more baseball for more kids. It seemed like what came out from all the different groups, the administrative and the focus groups, was that if something will create more of a sense of belonging for the children, then that's what we're aiming for. That's kind of our mantra. So that I'd see that's a theme that kind of pervaded a lot of the comments. I'll just add one more thing. What's interesting is if you look at option 1 and option 2, and you got pre-K to 3 in 2 buildings, and you got pre-K to 5 in 3 buildings, the numbers of students in those buildings is not that different. It's about, I'm just using it like 2,800 for a round number for enrollment. You have about 440 students in the 3 building model and about 440 students in the 2 building model because it's K to 3. So the number of students in the buildings is not that different, just as an observation.
Okay, option 3 is the current configuration, pre-K to 3 in 2 buildings, 4th and 5th in 2 buildings, the junior high and the senior high. What's interesting about this is you see higher levels of agreement here with higher levels of disagreement that this option enables a positive learning environment or creates efficiencies. Only about 25% of the respondents to the survey agreed that this was a good option. And concerns, pluses, potentials, and concerns, the top comment was, we don't need all the elementary buildings. The buildings still need updating. Some people did feel that the option was working well, but yet we got comments that there's too many student transitions and it's not cost effective.
And again, I think if you look I call it under the category of lessons learned. One of the comments that came out, that a lesson that is being learned under the current configuration, is that there are some advantages to having a 4 or 5 cohort and treating them as a separate age group versus the younger elementary group, in the sense of getting them ready for that transition to the middle school. So again, when we say that the current configuration is working, it's kind of like that old adage up in Maine when they put an ad in the paper to sell something, and something it works, could work better. And I think that's kind of the impression we got from the comments there.
So option 4 is pre-K to 4 in 3 buildings, junior high and a senior high, closing an elementary building. This also had only about 20% of the people that responded to the survey agreed that this option would enable a positive learning environment. And again, about 25% felt that it would create efficiencies and lower costs, but the majority, disagreed that this was a really good and viable option. And 94, this is a huge, actually, number of comments coming from a survey that 5th grade should not be in the junior high. While a couple of people said it was an efficient use of space and reduced student transition. A lot of comments. So then we asked a separate question: what's your preferred option? The preferred option by all groups across the board was option 2, where 40% of the overall respondents indicated that they preferred option 2, almost 37% of the parents, more than half of the teachers, and 50% of the community members. The staff, these were staff members who were not teachers, did prefer option 1 as their preferred option. But option 2 seems to be the consensus among other groups. And do you have a sense, Rod, about why staff members were less favorable for that particular option?
For option 4.
For option 2.
For option 2, I can't say I have a strong impression, but I think again, they're looking at just the overall. I want to look at the numbers here real quick, but just looking at the overall staffing. I'm going to say alignment. That the comment of how are these buildings going to be staffed once the decision made. I think it reflects more of some of the uncertainty.
I have a question. Option 1 and 3 are the same, essentially the same academic model, but one's having one building, one's having two buildings. Was there anything that in the comments that stuck out that would say, why would you prefer one for, like, if you weren't a parent, why would you prefer having only 1 4-5 building versus 2 4-5 buildings? Was there any specific comments that stuck out to differentiate those two options?
I mean, I think having 4 and 5 in one building, the comments that came out in the focus groups is the advantages there. Yeah, you have all the teachers in one grade level under one roof. So you have that ability to have more co-planning of subject areas. You have the ability to have some collaboration, hopefully between, again, since they're all the fourth grade teachers in one building, all the fifth grade teachers are all in one building. And you also have, at that level, there is some, again, I'm not totally familiar with how the curriculum is delivered, but for example, in some schools, they take elementary science or elementary math, and so they have specialized teaching for that. So again, when you have everyone under the same grade level, you can do some different kind of grouping of students and providing more small group instruction to kind of bridge students who need additional help, because they're all, again, they have everyone there. They can break it out into more targeted academic grouping.
And Jackie, can you make any commentary related to the difference between those two options from the survey comments?
So the only thing that I was gonna add is if you look at putting 4 and 5 together in one building earlier, then that gives them an opportunity to move and grow as a cohort, as opposed to showing up in 6th grade and still integrating from 2 different locations. So while it's still a transition, it sort of the merging of students together sooner helps from kind of the emotional, social standpoint, because now we're going to the junior high, but at least I know the people I'm moving with.
Any other questions? So we actually asked in the teacher focus group, we did the audience response polling thing with them in the focus group and asked them how well, each of the options supported a positive learning environment, focus on special education, staffing, maintenance, and implementation. Basically, had the teachers actually rate each of the options based on the criteria that you all selected, and we'll all be ultimately re-rating these options again after you have a chance to think about this data. So if you look at the way that the teachers actually did the criteria rating, and if you look at how they scored, option 2 is the best alternative based on creating a positive learning environment, supporting special education, supporting staffing, although option 1 was perceived by the teachers to be a little bit better than option 2 related to staffing. That for ongoing maintenance, option 2 appears to be the best option, and with implementation, the ease of implementation, option 2 and option 3 scored equally, even though option 2 had higher ratings on each of the other criteria. But if you add all of those together, option 2 appears to be the best option overall based on those criteria from the point of view of the teachers who participated in the focus group.
Before you go, go back to that slide again, please.
Yep.
So my question to you as a statistician is that when I look at option 2 and option 1, I agree with you that the whole numbers are favor option 2, but it appears to me that there is not that big a gap between 1 and 2.
Option 1's a close second.
But there is between 3 and 4.
Correct. And there's a big difference between 3 and 4 and 1 and 2.
Correct.
Okay? There's a dramatic drop off.
So would
Wait a minute,
There's a dramatic drop off in rating. So option 1 and option 2, there's not a whole lot of difference. They're close, but there and option 3 and 4 are closer, but there's a big difference between option 1 and 2 and option 3 and 4 in the minds of the teachers.
The drop occurs after 2. From 2 to 3 is still a big gap. It looks
Oh,
like
yeah.
to me. Yeah. that's
Oh
what I'm
yeah,
saying.
between 2 and 3 is a huge gap,
So,
and even a big gap between 4, which came in third. But you got to look at that even in the context of this, because if you look at, we asked the focus group, well, which is your preferred option? There was a much more people said option 2 than option 1. If you look at the preferred,
the,
okay.
And on that chart right there, option 2, which is the 0%, is actually option 3. Is that a mistype?
Oh, that's a typo. Oh yeah, the 0% is option 3.
but to go back to that other slide.
Yeah, I'm
So
sorry.
would you say that there is or is not a statistically significant difference between 1 and 2?
Okay, so here's the thing. This data came from the teacher focus group. This is not survey data.
Oh,
So this is
okay.
qualitative research
Okay.
that represents the opinions of the sample of teachers who showed up for the meeting.
Okay.
Okay? So keep that in mind. So, we asked them to sort of go through the exercise from the point of view of the teachers. And this gives you some information on what that group of teachers thinks. Okay?
Okay, I'm good.
Yeah, but what's the second option too on here is and what, 8 of us looked at this and nobody caught that? So we should have run it by Terry. So yeah, that's option 3 that got, none of the teachers that came to the focus group felt that option 3 was the best option. And
I'm sorry if I missed this. How many teachers came to the focus group?
I think there were a total of 10.
And we had representatives from all the elementary buildings.
Okay.
So without seeing numbers, you're almost saying you're going to be between 1 and 2 without seeing the rest of the research.
Well, and you're gonna see that theme across all of the rest of the data that we had. So we also got teacher and administration comments on the options. And if you look at and this came from the
From both the work session with the administrative group and then also from the focus group.
So Rodney did a work session with the administrative team that did not include the criteria rating exercise the way we did it with the teachers, but did include commentary on the pros and cons of all 4 of the options. Okay, so
And in one of the other documents you have here tonight, I believe from the architect, there's a grid in there, a colored table and grid, and that actually was created by the administrative work session group prior to us meeting. It was like a prepared document that they were asked ahead of time to put together pros and cons. And then when we did the work session, we actually went through those in addition to asking, I would say, deeper questions or more probing questions about why certain things were being listed as pros and why they were being listed as cons. And so some of the comments then were generated from that.
right, so you see here, the teacher input is in red and the administrative input is in black. So you could see the
How those two groups' comments were combined together.
right. And that their perspectives are different.
Yeah.
That's why they're color coded in 2 different colors, because the perspectives are different. Okay. And if you look at option 1, the teachers were in favor of combining 4th and 5th graders earlier, looking to push curriculum alignment, but yet they were feeling that 4 to 5 would need to run 2 specials at a time to manage class size, and you have a lot of kids in one space. It's difficult for continuity, too many students transition. So there's some downsides to option 1 that the teachers and both the teachers administration came up with for this one. They're different perspectives.
And that's why we put them in the same chart. I'll be honest with you. I know Jackie did a great job with that, but after we talked or after we had those sessions, I will say we got different inputs, and you can see that we got some different inputs from the teacher focus group versus the administrative work session. And I think that's the value of it, that we did get some different perspectives.
Right. And if you look at option 2, the positives of option 2 are, more continuity for children, help for older children to model and work with younger ones, smaller class sizes, exposure to things like music and band. There's still concerns about a lot of small children in one place. The focus is different at primary versus older elementary. K-5 is still a big age gap. So there's pros and cons with all of them. Yes.
Is there any way to explain the lot of children in one place comment?
So this came
Where
from
is
the
that, Barb?
teacher focus group. The downside comment of a lot of small children in one place
Option 2.
related to option 2.
Just,
Oh, okay.
I mean, just the idea that you have more younger children. If you're having a K-5 building, you have both the younger and older students together. So they're just saying that you have more small children in that building versus when you break it out. If you had a 4 or 5 building, you wouldn't have as many small children. It's a smaller, even though it's concentrated K-3.
But if you have 2 K-3, you're gonna have more Ks and 1s in 2 buildings than you would in 3.
Option 2.
So the statement.
I mean, I'm taking that, I'm not arguing, I'm just saying that was my impression, but I'm looking at again, they're saying that the K-5 is still is a large age group. That some people might see that as a con versus when you look at what some people felt were the pros of breaking the age groups out into different levels. That's all.
And,
I'm not saying it's a preference, but but some people were saying that could be perceived as a con.
well, I can understand the K-5 is a big,
Yeah.
but a lot of small children in one place. If you have 3 K-5s, you have fewer younger kids in each building.
Well, that's what I was trying to determine if it was like kindergartners mingling with fifth graders kind of comment or
Mhm.
just a lot of little.
I'll be honest
kids.
with you, I'm thinking of that myself here.
Well, and I believe the comment was just that's just a lot of little bodies to have
Yeah.
all the one space.
I mean, 450 kids is a lot of kids.
Right. And
One
again,
room, one room.
it was a comment.
Yeah.
Okay,
We would put them in different rooms.
probably.
We probably would try.
Wait, I guess if you're banking on if you're saying a lot of little kids, a small children in one place, maybe they're thinking a 220 school as they're set up is a smaller school. Yeah, it's hard to know which way they really wanted to explain that. But
Right. We know what they said. We don't necessarily know why they said it.
Yeah. We're basically-
Okay. So, yeah. So option 3, the pros of option 3 were already know the routine and building expectations. The downside of it is number of student transitions and, higher costs, smaller schools though on the plus side help with relationship building. So again, there's pluses and minuses to that option. And option 4 probably had the lowest number of positives and the highest number of negatives. Okay.
And no positives from the teachers.
And no positives
No,
from the teachers.
I said to Deb before the meeting, of all the options, that option has elicited probably the strongest emotional response from staff. They just really have questions, negative impressions about putting fifth graders in with the junior high population. There were comments like you would no longer have a junior high school. It would be a different school, period. And so, I mean, but I'm saying overall, the emotional tone changed, I felt, significantly when we started talking about putting fifth graders in the junior high school. And again, I know it's that option is out here because we're looking at the efficiency and looking at the use of space. With these groups, we didn't get into that discussion. We were talking about academic impacts and also, again, and one more comment just that I think goes through all this and maybe ties in with the emotional response. I challenged both groups when I met with them to explain to me, kind of being a devil's advocate, why is this such a big deal about transitions. What's the big deal about transition? I mean, I have my own opinion about it, but I wanted them to tell me why is transitioning such a big issue, that there's too many transitions or just transitions between schools. And I think, the explanations and the comments came back that were very much along the lines of the social and emotional learning and the social and emotional development of children. And I made the comment earlier about that I thought one common theme that pervaded both these meetings was this whole sense of we want to do what's best for children in the sense of having them feel that they belong in school, that they belong in their class, that they have a sense of belonging when they come in to this school district. And I think that's why, again, the fifth grade, in the elementary, why those comments are just not acceptable to a lot of people. But I go back to, the whole idea of transitions. People are focused in on that whole aspect of, could this impact a person's, just sense of belonging to a school. It was interesting. One of the support staff members, not a teacher, one of the support staff members made the comment, if a student is told to go from one elementary school to another one, not the one that they normally would attend, not their normal attendance area, that has a big impact on that kid. I mean, I thought that was a very perceptive comment by that staff member. And I said, it wasn't a person who teaches, it was one of our support people, but these are people that see the children in their roles each day too. And they just felt like they had to offer that comment. So I think it ties in a lot with some of the, like I said, and there's a focus obviously on social and emotional learning as part of your curriculum also. So I don't think it's an accident that some of those comments or coincidence that those comments came out.
So that's the results from the survey and the focus groups. And you have in front of you a document that was prepared by the architects that lays out some cost figures and the pros and cons of each item that was put together by administration.
And the summary is basically what I wrote up as a summary of that administrative work session.
Are you talking about this document?
Yes, this one right here.
Or are you
The one with
talking
the
about
building
this
on the
one?
front.
This one, yeah. One of the building on the front. But the other document has that multicolored grid. That's the same data is reproduced in the architect's comments. But they took that and then they added to that then their additional data about cost and some of the other issues related to it. But we're just pointing that out, that it's the same information. And the summary at the beginning is again, was written from the other comments we have and submitted to the architect.
Right. And if you look at the various options related to the, the kind of the cost, the estimated cost of renovations and additions versus maintenance and staffing, option one's probably, at least from the
I guess we're going
ballpark perspective.
The architect going to get.
Oh, they here to talk about it?
Yeah, I was gonna say, we don't want to.
Well, let them talk about
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. But we just wanted to, show that where some of that data that they have was submitted from the work sessions that we had. That's all. But I think, those are basically what we pulled together.
Right. So is one of the architects online?
Yes.
Okay.
This is Elijah Dolly, Buchart Horn Architects. And I have Tom Shelley here as well.
Hello.
Thank you, Debbie, Jackie. Really fantastic report. And yes, there's definitely some overlap in the pros and cons. I think we were working from the same information. Just wanted to make sure that was included in the considerations whenever you're looking at the cost at the same time. And yeah, we wanted to include in the report everything that was provided to us by admin, as well as some of the enrollment numbers. I don't know if you want us to run through the costs that we have found associated with each of the options. I think that's probably the most significant piece of information missing from the conversation so far.
Elijah,
please
if that's
do.
okay, I think that makes sense, right? Right now, we kind of know the pros and cons. We're not ready to make a decision. We want to go slow to go fast, but they also understand there's a price tag associated with each one of these options. And it seems the way, just at a quick glance, and I'm sure you'll go over it, 2 of the 4 options are about $11 million, and the other remaining 2 are about $13 million. And it kind of looks like we know which 2 rows to the top, and those 2, it looks like one's 11 million and one's 13 million. But I'll let you go through and explain that just to help guide the discussion now.
Perfect. So let me see if I can share my screen here.
The one, the one that does not have our school building picture on it.
I have to ask Eli. It's been bothering me. What building is that?
So that's a project we're working
Development
on
history.
right now. Oliver Bathhouse in downtown Pittsburgh. It's a historic building project that we're very proud of, about to go under construction.
We can buy this, building and use it for one of our schools. The busing's gonna kill us, but what the heck?
But the building would be remarkable.
It is one of our placeholders, and unless we have a more prominent image, because we always like to show it off. It's not letting me share here, or it's thinking. I have the, if you all have physical copies in front of you.
They do, Elijah. Everyone has a printed
Okay.
copy.
Okay. The numbers haven't changed from the updated, just the cover photo. So starting with option 1, this is close to one of the schemes that we were looking at whenever we started this project, and looking at Eisenhower and the renovations and addition that were associated there. So, and I would say with all of the options, our starting point was the numbers that we had already taken a pretty close look at, especially for a schematic level design. We started with those base numbers and then worked up from there, the other numbers based on our understanding of the state of Ben Franklin, East Pike, and Horace Mann, what we've seen in other reports, and as well as what level of intervention, renovation we were anticipating based on these comments. So with option 1, looks like it's still spinning. I'll just let that go. With option 1, in Eisenhower, looking about 4 million, and Ben Franklin around 2 million. Again, that is to pick up the pick up all of the changes in the classrooms to make sure that they are updated to the grade levels that have been listed, and the remodeling whenever we look at the additions to each of them for the office in Ike, classroom, STEAM, library, and the big number here is the gym. That we're guessing was going to be a 1.5 to 2 million addition. We had included that as an alternate in one of our other cost analyses. And so that's why our original addition cost for just the offices, and then I think we had 4 classrooms in there whenever we were looking at this back in April and May. That number had come out to be pretty roundly, no matter which option we were going with, around 3.2 million. So to err on the side of caution, we've bumped the total there, including the gym, up to 5 million. So you end up with 11 million in renovations and additions. Again, these are ballpark numbers. Without looking more closely at what an addition actually is, how many square feet you're looking at, these are our best guesstimates at what this could be. And then,
Eliza, can I ask a question on the Eisenhower 4 million?
Mhm.
Is how does the fire damage come into that?
That is included in this, and that was again included in the numbers that we had provided before.
Okay, so it's not 4 million plus the fire damage, it's 4 million gets us back operating again.
Correct.
Okay, thank you, sir.
A little bit more nebulous, even than the additions and sort of square foot ballpark costs, was how the maintenance and staffing plays out. Those end up being finite numbers that we would be able to get a better grasp on whenever we dig more deeply into this. But going on a range of a $1 sign to a $5 sign, that's the scale that we're going at on all of these. And this first option is going to be one of the lowest impact as far as maintenance and staffing goes. Moving on to option 2.
Excuse me, Elijah, before you go off that.
Sure.
On the staff savings, you have an administrative assistant at 42,000. Is that a number from you or is that a number from our administration?
That is from your admin.
Is this the salary or is this their total cost?
That's their entire package.
Okay,
Benefits,
good.
everything.
Very good. So
For all those positions.
these are real numbers.
Yep.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, Elijah. Thank you.
Moving on to option 2, you have very similar renovations. In fact, we use the same numbers. We don't see too much change in the renovation impact for this option. However, this option would require an addition for STEAM and a library at Ben Franklin. That may be less than $2 million, but we wanted to, again, err on the side of be conservative with these numbers. So we put $2 million in for that. And, being at a different school, it would probably be a different set of contractors. You may be able to pick up some efficiencies if you're able to use the same contractor on all these projects. But again, we were just assuming you have separate bids for each of these projects, and all of it is going ahead at typical rates. So that puts this one a little more expensive.
Elijah,
Mm-hmm.
This is Walter. My question is, and I understand that these are essentially, schematic numbers, okay, but relative to each other, they're relatively accurate. Is that correct?
Yes. Based on the square footages that we know and square footage numbers, ballpark again, that we are used to seeing in today's bidding climate.
Eli, can you hear me? This is Tom.
Yep.
Let me just say to the board that we looked at what we call appropriate planning numbers, 4.5 square foot per student in an elementary library, for instance. So if there's 400 kids in a building, then 400 times 4.5 sizes the library. And if you look at the STEAM room, if you want to include art, library, and computerization, and so on, all in one place, then we're going to have to work hard on what the appropriate square footage number is for 400 students. We set a music and a choral room at 900 each if you're going to have music and choral in an elementary school, and you're probably doing that in 750 square foot bases today. And so we did look at that, and we counted classrooms. East Pike has 21, as far as I'm concerned. Eisenhower has 15, but you can add 2 from the existing library, and you can add 1 from the existing art, making 18 overall. All of these schools, are between 390 and 450 kids. So somewhere between 17 and 23 classrooms is what you need for standard classroom teaching. And then you go to all the special spaces, and we have figures that we will use to help the administration establish the appropriate size of those spaces. And we did look at that for each one, but not in the great detail. I just wanted to point out that these numbers do come from what I'll call standard elementary school planning numbers.
Thanks, Tom. That's a good clarification. Option 2, we understand that there would be a little bit more requirement for maintenance and staffing based on how the schools shake out, but we don't believe it would be significantly more than option 1. And we've given this the $2 sign. Again, this is something that we would certainly be looking into in more detail as we move through the process, but for planning's sake, not significantly greater, but it would be slightly greater. Looking at option 3, this in this scheme, and again, we've not dug too much into Horace Mann and everything that would be required there, but we do understand there's significant shortcomings in terms of handicapped accessibility, and bringing that up to current code and usability for all of the students in the area. So we've put a ballpark number in there for $4 million for renovations to Horace Mann. For these sorts of renovations, we've seen more, we've seen less, but I looked back at a couple of projects that we've done recently, and for the age of Horace Mann, the size of it, and the extent of the compliance maneuvers, we'll say, we would need to do, I think that you would be pretty easily into the $4 million range. The additions would not need to be as significant, of course. Whenever you leave all of the schools alone, we would still be looking at, I believe, the same addition that and some of the fire renovations that we were looking at Eisenhower earlier in the year. We may be able to cut some of that program out, maybe 2 classrooms as opposed to 4, or maybe no classrooms. And so I reduced the cost on that addition at Eisenhower if we're assuming that we are able to keep all of the schools open. So that brings the total to 13 on option 3. However, I did want to mention this will have obviously the highest cost for staffing and maintenance, having another old school open and running, and of course all of the staffing that goes along with that to have another facility open. So pretty easily the most expensive to maintain and staff of all of these options. Moving on to option 4. This scenario ends up being pretty similar to option 1. You're going to have the same renovations required at Eisenhower and Ben Franklin as in option 1, and you're going to have the same additions required at Eisenhower as option 1. Again, notably including the gym, lobby restrooms that are associated with the gym, and all of the additional space that we had already looked at in schematic design at Eisenhower. So these numbers are going to be the same exact thing as option 1, and the maintenance and staffing, we believe that would be probably the most efficient of any of them. If you could give it a $50 sign, it's the most efficient for staffing. However, we understand that in the real world and other considerations, those are not reflected in the costs. So those are, again, pretty rough numbers, but hopefully give you an idea of how they compare against each other in costs. We don't see a huge cost difference between any of the options. Maybe option 3 is going to be the most expensive in the long term, and option 4 would be the absolute cheapest. But all in all, as we were looking at these, it didn't seem like cost is going to be as significant of a factor, or probably should be in your decision making, given how close they are together.
May I make one other suggestion to the board? This is Tom Celli. I picked up on the comments from the surveys that many individuals, both staff and community people, commented that they felt the buildings were in poor condition. And if you read their comments, I think you can agree with that. My comment is, if you're going to have 3 K-5 buildings or 4 elementary buildings, if we want to put it in that context, I want to urge you to aim, and maybe you can't do it in the next 2 years, but aim at having what I call equal facilities across the district for all elementary students. So regardless of which building I attend, I have the same access to a STEAM room, same access to a gym, same access to a library, and so on. Classrooms are classrooms, but all those specialty spaces really add a lot to socialization. They add a lot to the student's ability to get along with others outside of a more rigid classroom, and I think would do wonders in terms of just being able to say to the public, we're going to have equal facilities at each of the elementary buildings.
Tom, this is Mike. I enjoy and agree with your comments. My question would be for someone who's completely ignorant on the subject of school construction. What does the $4 million, like if I'm looking at option 2, what does the $4 million in renovations for Ike get us? And what does the $2 million that Ben Franklin get us? And does that get us where you think we should be when we talk about having equal facilities across the district based on the work that you provided us?
Yes, if you use these numbers, I think you can get equal facilities at each of the, I was working on the K-5 premise at 3 buildings, but it doesn't matter. If you do that, I think you can get equal facilities at each building. But remember that the new facilities that we would propose for library, computerization rooms, which we call STEM rooms, and now it's called STEAM because they include art in that, in the current literature about education. But library, STEAM rooms, music, choral, all of those specialty spaces, especially the ones without music, should be wide open and places where people pass through 2 or 3 times a day. And that may be a little harder to manage in an elementary building, but it's going on in many, many places.
So Tom, one clarification to that. One thing that we didn't include in any of these options is renovation monies for East Pike. As we were reading through these comments, we did see that there was sort of a blanket statement about all the buildings need to be renovated or in tough shape, but as we toured East Pike, it seemed to be in better condition and maybe not needing a renovation right away. But if you want to go to having completely equal facilities, we may need to spend some money at East Pike.
Elijah, I think we have a question from a board member. Before I turn over to her, and just for sake of clarity, I think I'm correct. This cost does not, when you look at Ike renovations, it does not include the additional entryway as far as the configures, correct? Or it does?
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh,
no,
awesome.
it
Okay.
does.
Does.
Yeah,
Okay, it
that's
does. Yep,
covered in the
okay.
addition. Yep.
Ms. Parker?
So the 2 million for Ben Franklin, does that include fixing the handicap accessibility and upgrading all the electrical and the bathrooms?
That would be. We would need to look at the extent of that. I think our assumption had just been looking at remodeling for classrooms.
That's how I read it. The 2 million is for the classrooms, but it wouldn't get the renovation of the full building.
We may need to, I believe we'd need to spend a little bit more for the bathrooms, and you said electrical upgrades?
Electrical, and there's the handicap accessibility on the one wing.
Okay. Is that a bunch of masonry openings that need to be adjusted?
My opinion would be, Elijah, we'd have a further conversation. I think we can avoid the handicap needs that could be done by simply just redesigning the school. But I think Ms. Barker's right on the bathrooms. I think she's right on everything else that she said would need to be looked at. For example, what they do now is they have wings, kindergarten, first, second, third. And if a kid is in a wheelchair handicap, there's one set of classrooms that have to go up a set of stairs. What you could do is redesign the school into families, into teams, and have one wing being K through 3, another wing K through 3, et cetera, and et cetera. And that can help avoid that need.
Okay.
But that was looked at by our previous architects, and then the board didn't take any action on that at that time.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay, I do. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that cost would be, across the board for all options. So it would be probably equal for every option. But I was just kind of curious if any of that banked into that 2 million. So which sounds like it doesn't.
We had not considered that in these options.
And I think to Ms. Barker's point, that's something that would have to be considered because it's nice to have a nice classroom, but if you can't plug in a computer, we're in trouble, right?
That's right.
So it doesn't impact one or the other choices positively or negatively. It's an additional cost.
And
It would have to be included in all options. That's correct.
Unless the school you closed isn't Horace Mann, it's Ben Franklin.
I don't think that's being suggested anywhere.
Well, no. So technically, it really shouldn't be any bill. Like it was supposed to be just. I guess the survey was blank. Like, what structure would you like? It's not tied to a building.
I guess that's true.
So, okay. That's it. Thank you.
Mr. Harley, I think I interrupted you, sir.
Elijah, there's a wing at Ben Franklin that's not accessible. If we're going to use East Pike as our base reference point for our elementary schools, then we should have the buildings at the end of this event. We should have the buildings accessible entirely, including the restrooms, including all the classrooms, so that we get beyond this problem. We should have safe electrical. We should have sufficient data stuff, and again, using East Pike as the watermark. I think if we could bring the other buildings up to this level, that could be our goal.
Yeah. One other thing.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I work for the board. Whatever you want to spend, just understand there's a cost associated with that. So I agree with you. I think we should have all these buildings up.
Absolutely.
So I'm absolutely fine with that. I just,
And Tom, that was exactly why we hadn't included any costs for East Pike. Our assumption had been just that East Pike, as it is sort of a benchmark, and that we're bringing any other schools up to that standard.
And Elijah, if East Pike needs a steam room, then that's something that we need to add to the project. I'd like to take a look at where we truly want to be. Not let the budget drive it at this point. We can back into this, but let's see what it costs us to do what truly needs to be done. And I would like not to kick this can down the road to another board. I like to move it ahead. So and we're making great progress. Don't get me wrong.
But you're right, Tom. Like, do you bite it all off and say, well, we're going to spend $30 million, or do you look at it and say, okay, this is our end goal? The parents like this option, or this works out best, and you say, okay, this is how we're going to get there in chunks. But you're right. We need to know.
That's exactly what we're doing.
The end goal.
Right now, we're 11 to 13 million, and maybe it's 15 million, and maybe it's 10. Okay, but the end goal, we need to make sure we look at that. We don't short circuit. Is my concern.
yeah, I agree with Mr. Hardy because you're also going to have a conversation about a high school here in a decade and what you're going to do there. So you have to start chipping away at this. So whatever that looks like, we'll leave up to, it's ultimately your decision and as well as architects, but you're right. Something has to give here. And that'll be your decision.
And don't forget, this is Tom Celli again. When we get to planning specifics for the 3 elementary buildings or 4, depending on your choice, Franklin has 27 classrooms, if my count is correct, compared to Eisenhower having 15 existing, and I added 2 for the by taking the existing library out and making two. And I added one for art by moving art into the STEM room. East Pike has 21. You're bound to have, if you try to have equal populations when you assign busing routes and families and so on to each of these buildings, Franklin is going to have some excess space in those classrooms, which we can put to other uses. We just have to figure out what's best. And each of these buildings will have a slightly different design. I'm just hoping that that centerpiece of what I'm going to call 21st century learning, the STEM room and the library and the art room and so on, is pretty much the same at each one. It might be a little bigger at one, a little smaller at another, but that's going to depend on how we can tuck into the the L shapes of the existing building also.
Tom,
Yes.
this is Walter Schroth.
Hi.
When you're talking about library, are we talking about a traditional library, or with all the access to the internet, or is there a new way to look at the libraries?
Yes, there is, and it's heavily computerized. But again, the computers for a third grader are a different, what do I want to say, a different league than the computers for a sixth grader. I saw
Understood.
a grandchild of one of my friends running his whole family and teaching them how to use their cell phones and how to use their computers, and he was in the sixth grade.
I understand. The other point I want to make, though, about East Pike is that it had a renovation 25 years ago, something. 1999, there was a major renovation done here, which is, I think, one of the reasons why it can be used sort of as the standard to try to bring the rest of the buildings up to, because none of those other buildings have had that level of restoration throughout their entire history.
Oh, that's fine with me. We'll take a very close look at all three or four buildings as we get into schematics here.
And I also kind of agree with Tom, but I'm going to be maybe a little more cautious in the approach. Hopefully, whenever we get through with this process, we don't have to go back to these elementary buildings for some time to come, in the foreseeable future, that we will set and charted that course in the facilities and in our programming. So yeah, I agree with Tom that we need to try to carve out initially what might be the ideal way to approach this, but I also need to put a word of caution in budget wise, to make sure we have some options, should those costs balloon beyond what the appetite of the board or the community would be for any additional funds.
That's fair. I think you're right.
Mr. Celli, this is Julia Kukuro. Nice to see you again. So I do think that I think we'd be hard pressed to go beyond 20 million in terms of our tax base. Yeah, that's even a tough sell. But I think in terms of our tax base, and we've had our university plummet in enrollment, and it's going to be hard to get that back to where it was, if ever. So our tax base has eroded, and then we've had a lot of since our reassessment, a lot of tax assessment appeals. So I can't envision. I mean, you could put 50 million in these schools; it would be wonderful. But and I'm sure you know how to do that.
Yeah. Mount Lebanon High School only cost 109. No, I think we have to carefully plan schematics at each building, working closely with the administration and figure out what's appropriate in terms of the future. And part of the future is flexibility, and these buildings are not flexible. So that's going to work into the planning also.
Hello, this is Terry Kern, and I don't know, are we getting toward the end of the presentation? But
the only other thing we need to talk about is when do you want to have the work session where you actually pick the option?
Well, that's what I was gonna ask, and before, I would think we would want our architects to spend time and money on, and I agree, Tom, with what you discussed, was we ought to look at what's needed and then back off from there if we have to. But I would propose that we narrow this down to one or two options before we look at that. I think it's a lot easier, it's a lot.
Well, in our methodology that was proposed in our timeline would be, the next step would be a work session, or either next week or the following week, where you would actually pick one option,
Okay.
the preferred option, and then the implementation plan would be developed before the November election. I mean, that's what I'm talking
Jackie or Debbie, I think that while you and Shelley and his outfit have done a pretty good job coming up with some decent planning numbers here, I think at some point we need to have the administration, Mike, Jared, and so on, come back with some more specific numbers dealing with how they would want to actually staff where this thing would go.
And you expect that before a preferred option is selected?
What I'm envisioning would be that maybe we, as Terry was suggesting, maybe we pare this down to two options and then allow them to work that. And then we go to that point where we actually say, okay, of these two, with some maybe more refined numbers on how it would be staffed and how we would actually operate it. Because I'm suspicious that if we go to 3 K-5 buildings, that's almost going to be like totally revamping our entire system. And I think these guys and gals here need a chance to kind of try to figure that out and nail down some of those costs. The combination of the 4 or 5 into one building with the 2 pre-K to 3s may need some adjustments or some figuring on their part as well. But I think before the board is going to be ready to actually say one or the other, I think we're going to need, I know Uta sent out an email kind of suggesting some additional costing be provided. I pushed back in that we should probably divide it into 2 categories. One is capital and one is operational. So I think we're going to need to do a little deeper digging or a deeper dive here. But I also don't want to, I mean, it's obvious that option 4 is totally off the table, is in my opinion. And maybe the board would disagree, and I certainly would welcome that discussion, but I don't want to send them down a rabbit hole on something that there is absolutely no interest in this board to pursue. Okay. And it seems to me that you clearly had option 1 and option 2 from a community standpoint were the ones that garnered the most interest or the most viability. But that's what I would like to do, is try to pare it down. And if the board isn't ready to do it this evening, I'm okay with that. But I think at some point we need to go to 2 options and then get the deeper dive on the data. And then I think we can make that decision as to which option we prefer over the other. Cinda?
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't want to spend any more time talking about option 4. I think it's just obvious to everybody. So we're down to 3 options. I agree, and I said at our previous meeting that I want more numbers. I don't feel that I can make a decision without some cost numbers, some real cost numbers. And considering that option 3 is our current design, we have a lot of those numbers already. That's what we're doing. So we would really just need to do a deeper dive now on option 1 and option 2 and get the numbers that Uta and I and other people want for 1, 2, and 3, and then go from there.
How does the rest of the board feel?
I'm not so sure that even option 3 is even particularly worth it. Although I agree with everybody. We need some solid numbers, but option 3 is the current configuration.
Yeah, but we could use option 3 as a base.
That could be a base.
Yeah,
But
and
I
the
don't
other
see it
options-
surviving in the long run at this
Well, I
point.
don't see it surviving either, but I don't think that it's going to cause an awful lot of extra work to come up with numbers so
Yeah,
we can have it as something to compare.
I agree with that as a baseline, but in my feeling about it is it's
Well, and
it's gonna
academically,
get out of hand.
really academically, you can have it as a base, to compare.
I think it is the baseline academically.
Yeah, so it makes sense, that it survives. I agree with Cinda that the last option, I wanted to make sure that was not a viable option, just because we have the space, and it doesn't, and academically, it certainly seems like it has virtually no support. So I'm certainly willing to take that off the table, look at these other 3 options in more detail, prior to the workstation, so that we have.
Well, and the question is, how much time, because we were looking at options, and this was a very condensed timeline anyway, because we were looking at either this coming Monday, the 4th or the 11th for the work session, and the next public meeting to talk about the implementation plan the following week on the 18th, which is really fast.
Well, I think from the sound of it, I think we're okay with pushing that a little bit.
Yeah, respectfully, I would have to ask you to do that. I'd push it back as far as you feel comfortable, to be honest with you, because the 4 or 5, I think we can figure out a little quicker. You're talking about redistricting the whole district for 3 K to 5s. I don't know impact on busing. Staffing, I think we can figure out rather quickly. What I'm concerned about is busing. I don't know what impact that will have, meaning more buses or not. So I would like to have some real time to vet that out and look at that.
I'm also not so sure, Mike, that I don't think it's as simple as taking the 4 K to 5 buildings that we had 6 years ago or 8 years ago, whatever, and just simply lopping one of them off and saying that's the system that will be under 3 buildings. I'm not so sure that there isn't some additional thought that you and Rob and Justin need to make, so that if we're going to create this K to 3 or K to 5 in 3 buildings, there may be a different way that you're going to approach that, almost to the point where you're going to design 3 brand new buildings as far as what occurs inside the buildings. And so I think there needs to be some amount of time for you guys to think through that part of the process. Maybe Rod could help or whatever in providing you some additional information. But I'm thinking that this is a pretty major big deal that we're going to do.
Yeah, that won't be done by Monday.
If
I like the work, but we're not going to be done by Monday. Yeah,
Okay.
it is. I don't know what I don't know. I mean, because here's a lot of things we have to vet through. You're talking more buses. I mean, we have to vet through a lot of things. I don't know. What I'd like to do is, I kind of got you loud and clear. Let us debrief tomorrow morning. Let us talk to Eli and Tom, because that's going to help us really build this out a little bit more. And let us have time to process it and get back to you. That way I don't misspeak or get false hopes.
I
don't
also think
anybody on the board wants to rush this just to rush it. We want to get to the right answer.
I also think, Tom, Mr. Vukovich, I also think that realistically speaking, we're not going to have much of an answer back on Eisenhower from our legal counsel. Probably by the time they fuss around and exchange this and exchange that and spar, I think you're looking at closer to the end of October before we have any sense if they're going to up a cash offer, or if they're going to
Agreed.
how protracted the fight's going to be. So
Okay.
I'm concerned about that aspect because that's a big pile of money. That's a big pocket that we dip into to pay for all of this. And I think we need a little more assurances before we get too excited
Agreed.
that we've got. I'm going to put the number on the table. Are we going to see 4 million on that school? That's the number, and that's a big number for whatever we're talking about here.
I agree. And Tom and Eli, while you're on the phone, we would need you to help walk this through with us, right? To make sure that our concepts actually can be applied. Just very direct. I'm assuming we expired or expended all that fees that were associated with our costs so far, and there'll be incurring new fees to help us think through this next level. I'm asking, not saying.
That's a good question. I don't think so. I think that the info that was provided by the admin was more extensive. It was really good stuff than we
welcome.
were expecting, and we really appreciate that. I'll take a look at where we are. Again, it was a not to exceed, so whatever we have left is there to be spent as you instruct us. So.
And Eli, would you agree, though, this process would have to be done together, not in isolation, because we can think about the academic wants, we want, desires, but when it comes to cost projections, how many classrooms and whatnot, I think you would have to be part of that conversation, because the things that worry me are busing, right? If we have to increase more buses to Ike, what impact does that have on the community? Are people going to be upset there's more buses coming in that neighborhood? Parking, we're landlocked. We'd have to walk through a lot of things together. I'd rather, if they're asking for a complete project, which they are, we do have those questions up front, so we know what we're going with. If that makes sense, Eli.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
We'd like to
There would be some definite architectural impacts with all of this. We understand that that's one aspect of it. The cost is one aspect. The pain and everything that you guys have to deal with the busing and the redistricting is certainly an important part of it.
One other thing that I would ask the administration to look at, if you go for 3 K-5 buildings, try to settle I don't know if you can settle quickly busing patterns or anything else, but what would the enrollment be at each one? Would it be 390 kids at one and 430 kids at another? That will only affect classroom counts in the Pennsylvania Department of Education system, but it will affect square footage overall and therefore some slight costs. So it'd be nice to know if the 27 classroom building is going to have 450 kids and a 15 classroom building is going to have 390.
Right. And the way we do that most likely would be by looking at the busing and looking at the catchment areas, and that would help dictate what we do. That's why I'm saying it's a lot larger than just taking the number of kids we have divided by 3 buildings.
Okay.
The point I was going to make was we have 27 classrooms, 21 classrooms, 15 classrooms. The buildings don't have to be the exact same size.
Agreed.
And so we have a chance of utilizing facilities that we have.
Agreed.
Okay. So that's perfect. Thank
We
you.
would just have multiple iterations. That's why we need to sit down. Like now you're including Mike Travis and the busing, and we have software that can help project that. We just need time to run multiple scenarios with Tom and Eli part of that conversation.
But Mike, the along those lines though, if we do have different size with the buildings, if we're trying to get to that equity, then the size of the gym is not going to be significantly less or smaller.
No.
That you'd build it at Eisenhower versus the one that you may already have at. So there would be some issues there. And then the second aspect of that is the one of the things that's always been near and dear to this community and why we went with the current configuration was balancing the class size. And if we went to these 3 buildings, I would want to know, and Rob's over there nodding his head, okay, what the impact would be class size, and if we did have different size buildings, how that might impact positively or negatively what that class size calculation is versus if we had 3 buildings that were more or less the same size.
The only thing I'd say to this board respectfully is I think we have to make a difference between equity and equality. Right. I think we're using those words interchangeably, and I think they're vastly 2 different things. Equality, everyone gets a pair of shoes. Equity, everyone gets a pair that fits. What we want to do is sit time to look at and see what offering program we want to offer, what services we need, and then cross-reference that with not only the students, but the number of staff we have. Because I think to me, and I'm just spitballing here, busing is going to be a question we want to look at, so how we design it. Second one's going to be what other additional staff may we need. I'm assuming we're probably going to be okay as far as the classroom core content staffing. The question, the variable we need time to vet out is what does that mean for specials? What does that look like for specials? And we have to take time vetting that. And I don't know. Maybe we'll be okay, but we just need time to process that.
And your request that you called me today about your 6-week vacation starting on Monday has been canceled.
Fair enough, sir. Fair enough.
Well, so just back to the question of scheduling, is it even remotely realistic that any of that analysis could be done by the 18th?
No. I don't think. I mean, I would. If you ask me how I proceed, it seems like you have an appetite and a curiosity, and so does the community to learn more about the 3 pre-Ks, pre-K to 5s. I'd like to start vetting that one first, see where I'm at, and get back to you, then move on to the other 4 or 5. I think that may be a little bit more manageable, the large 4 or 5. But the one I really want to vet out is the one that seems to have the most traction or interest at this time. And I don't know. I don't know what I don't know, because this just came upon us. So I think let us debrief tomorrow. Let us talk to the team, meaning the architect, and I don't know if SSI needs to be included because they're just helping you reach a decision.
Right, and from our perspective, again, the next steps from the public engagement process was to come up with a preferred scenario, and which you folks need to do in a work session, and then sometime later, an implementation plan. And the administration and the architects are going to need time to actually, once they have a final, even if they've done some of these numbers, they're still going to need to have some time in between those 2 events to think through the implementation plan. And that final meeting is expected to be a public meeting.
And this is Terry. I think we're all in agreement that we're okay with pushing past the October 18th. Do we want to talk about an artificial deadline of the end of the year of trying to get to where we definitely have picked an option and we're into the implementation stage? Because I don't want this thing to keep rolling. I mean, we've made some great progress. The team has really done a transparent and structured process.
Let's say that loud. So we were talking about an operational definition of what would be in the implementation plan.
I was making the assumption that the implementation plan is that we'll have a meeting to really understand what all those costs are associated with all the renovations that you're talking about, including some of the ADA and some of the other you're talking about. We'll have your best estimates on transportation. That's part of the implementation. And it will have your estimates on staffing as it's going to support what your current equipment is.
And I see the actual implementation plan after the final choice is selected. That final implementation
Right.
plan should also include timelines for implementation.
I guess what I'm hearing here, and I'm just again being an observer, what I'm hearing, it sounds like there might be some appetite for having 2 implementation plans instead of getting it down to 1. No.
No, I think what they're talking
Okay,
about
well,
is
that's all
looking
I'm
at,
trying to
because
say.
our original proposal
To get it down.
was to get it down to 1 and then pick an implementation plan. What we're hearing from the board is you want to look at the final. You can narrow it down to those 2 options because they're close in interest. And you want to see essentially the full cost benefit of the 2 options before choosing one.
Right.
That's
Right.
correct. That's
So-
correct.
And that's going to take more time.
But I also want to pick up on what Terry said. And I guess this is a question for the board as well as for Mike. At some point, in order to keep this thing from just dragging on forever, we kind of need to pick a drop dead date, I think. Whether it's next week, next month, next quarter, whatever that date is, to say that this is when we will have this thing figured out, make the decision, and then move on. Otherwise, we can continue the conversation ad infinitum, as the euphemism goes.
Right. And I would say too, Rod, I would like also to pick some date to get to one option, and then we dig deeper into the implementation plan.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right,
I just
and
want to
then-
make sure
and then
we
the-
had a common understanding
Right.
of what implementation
What about
was.
December
Correct.
16th?
That's the digging
Is that the
deeper,
next-
Saturday?
includes the time frame.
Oh,
How about we just, how about respectfully, what if I just, again, give some time to talk to the architects? We sit down and debrief and say, what is a fair time frame? Because you can pick a date. I just don't know if it's right. I don't know if it's too long. I mean, so I would urge you to give me till Monday, at least report out Monday,
Yeah.
and say, after talking to architects and Jared, Rob, and Justin, here's what we think is a fair time frame. That way you still lock us in, but we're not just arbitrarily picking a date, because I don't know what I don't know right now with all the factors.
It's not just locking you in and the administration, it's also locking the board in. Okay, so that we have something holding our feet to the fire to come to some sort of a conclusion on this. And yes, it is you also, Mike, and the team, but I also think we need something that a goal or a target or whatever for the board to be kind of be driving ourselves and the administration towards. But you're absolutely correct. It needs to be a realistic time frame that guys can figure this out.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll say in conclusion and closure, you did a lot of great work. We went from 10 options to 4. Now I think we're at really 2, maybe 3. So you did do a lot of work. It's just we need some additional time if you want us to vet this out to really to hone in on those numbers, and it just won't be right away.
So, if we were to pick option 1 or option 2, which would mean closing of a building, will we then have to have the Act 34 hearing and the subsequent 90-day?
There's a whole other process legally that would have to occur. Absolutely.
So then it doesn't really matter if it's before or after election. Because that 90-day and everything could be reversed by whoever gets on the board on.
Yeah, I didn't say election. I just
Yeah.
want to just keep the momentum going. We're doing a really good job. I think everybody, the whole team, and we have.
And you have. And let me just say this, and I'll shut up. You have done a great job. I remember when I first got here, you first interviewed me, right? You got to calm because you're doing it transparently. You're doing it orderly. So a lot of kudos to you. You did go from 10 options to 4. Now I think we're kind of at 2, maybe 3. So there is some progress. This is one, again, I know I say it, never live up to it. This is one where we want to go slow to go fast. And we just want to get this right because there are some numbers that, I just can't account for at 7:30 tonight.
I do want to compliment Strategy Solutions and Rod. We did ask you to, pedal to the metal to get to this point. And I think you guys did great. I'm very pleased with the organization of the information you provided tonight. I think this was outstanding. It was exactly what, from my personal perspective, I was actually looking for. And so kudos to both groups. Rod keeps pointing to you, but okay, but
I'll point to Jackie.
okay, but I don't know how the rest of the board feels, but I'm thrilled that you got done what you got done as quick as you did at this point. And then now we need just a little more time to vet it before we move on to the next steps.
And I have to agree with that too.
I
Very
have to
pleased.
say, the pairing of our two efforts on this, Rod was a delight to work with on it. But you definitely got a richer end product because we were working together.
And we can see that.
Tom?
I know we want to go slow to go slower and make the right decisions, but I also want to point out that I would like to have the 5th grade out of the junior high in fall 2022. So that also puts our feet in the fire. Okay.
Yeah, Tommy, Elijah, I think that's directed at you two. So be ready.
Okay. Anything else from the board?
Nope. 7:36. We'll close the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you
Nice
all.
job, Jerry.
Yep.
Good
Thank you.
night.
Thank you.